Welcome back. As you can see, we're ready for our inductive study. I've got Evernote open on the left side of my screen, Olive Tree app open on the right side of my screen. We're beginning at Mark chapter 1, verse 16 this time, and probably going to verse 20. You can see that we've got some questions to answer, inductive style with the text. O, the first question, observation, what did I hear? I, interpretation, what does it mean? A, application, what do we need to do? Then summary, pray, and share. All right, let's get to the text and let's dive in. So I'm reading Mark chapter 1, 16, New Living Translation. Let's see how far we're going to go. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." Very applicable. And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little farther up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. How often do our sons leave us, or our daughters for that matter, when their friends call them, hey, let's go play, or something like that? Call them at once, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. That's funny. Okay, let's break this text down inductively. So as you can see, we've jumped ahead a little bit, so I've broken it down. I kind of looked at it, and here is the results of me going through it, and hopefully you've got different results. But what jumped off the page for me, what did I hear? Simon and Andrew were fishing. Jesus called them to follow him. He invited fishermen to fish for men. Now I think that's pretty applicable, right? Because if we're looking for ways to capture people's attention, then we need to be mindful of the context in which people are living. So Jesus was very contextual with his call to fishermen. He called out, let's go fish for people. It kind of makes me think, and I know I'm not trying to do the interpretation right here, but it kind of makes me think how important it is to be contextual with our conversations that we have with other people, particularly about the gospel. So they immediately followed him, and the immediateness of their following Jesus really stood out to me. Jesus called James and John, who were also fishermen, and they immediately followed Jesus, leaving their dad behind. Poor dad. Dads are always seem to be doing all the work, and moms tend to be doing all the work also. Well, maybe guys like me retreat into our offices and pretend to be working very, very hard, but actually doing videos of inductive studies. They're sweating. My wife's sweating while I'm sitting here in my seat. What does it mean? Okay, here's what it means. Here's what I came up with. I notice, first of all, that Jesus draws a parallel between the world and between God's kingdom. So what was normal for people's lives is fishing back then, and what's also applicable for God's kingdom is fishing. It's two different kinds of fishing. But I noticed right away the contextual, sort of the street cred of Jesus' invitation. Has some street credibility. You know, Jesus says, "Two fishermen, come and be fishers with me," in an entirely different world system, in a different kingdom. And so it applied to both. The call is to communicate the gospel. So this ties in to the four-part thesis in the very opening passage in Mark chapter 1. Remember the four-part thesis in Mark chapter 1. We're going to be learning something about what it means to hear the gospel, what it means to receive Jesus, what it means to follow Jesus, and what it means to be an agent. Those are the four things that we're going to look at in the text. So right now we're looking at communicating the gospel. People can't hear without communicators. And it's funny that Jesus here, he doesn't seem to be looking for those who will receive the message as much as it looks like he's looking for those who are going to share the message with him, alongside him. So he's calling this group of people to join him in communication, not just in listening, but it's almost like, come alongside me, be fishers of men along with me. The response was immediate. I like that. I reflect so often in my life that my response to Jesus isn't quite as immediate. But certainly in this gospel, it's written like the response was immediate, no hesitation. They follow Jesus right away, leave their poor dad in the boat and whatever else they're doing, and immediately they're following Jesus. Here's what else kind of in my head as I'm trying to interpret this. This is what else stands out to me. Growing from the theme of hear, receive, and follow. Agency is all over this, right? But let's just stick to hear, receive, follow for this moment. Growing from the theme of hear, receive, and follow, it looks like we're seeing Jesus building his team of communicators. So in the very beginning, as he's coming to communicate the gospel, he's starting with a team. He's not going to do this whole proclamation thing alone. He's building a team right here to start with. He's calling people who will be his lead team. In my opinion, that's what he's doing. And he'll be equipping them to be the initial communicators after himself for the gospel. So the disciples heard. That's point number one. Thesis point number one, the hearing. They heard. And the disciples received, they believe. It's not clear in the text. However, they just responded yes to following Jesus. And I would be hard-pressed to think that somebody would follow anybody without knowing what they were getting themselves into. So my assumption is that they've already heard his message. This is my assumption. They don't know it completely, but they've heard it. It looks like they believe. They believe that he's got some kind of credibility enough to follow him. So hear, believe. And now the disciples have made the initial commitment into followership, into following Jesus. I should say into following Jesus, because followership includes agency, and yet agency is a part of this. So they left their life behind to live the life of a follower and be empowered to live a life of agency, demonstrating, sharing the gospel, demonstrating the kingdom of God. Although that's not fully explained in the text right now, I think that that's what's really going on here. There seems to be two big points going on here from my perspective. As I'm dissecting the text, as I'm trying to figure out what's really going on here, I think at this point we need to remember that we're still in Mark chapter 1, which means that this is still introduction. Like in the very first passage of Mark, we see the four-part thesis: hear, receive, follow, agency. We're still in introduction. Mark is still setting up what we're going to be seeing in the rest of the gospel. So I think that what we see here is the introduction about how Jesus is building his lead team. In my opinion, I think that's what we're seeing here. That not only is he communicating the gospel and he's inviting people to receive him and then calling people into following him like he just did the disciples, but he's also calling people into agency to walk alongside him. So this is part of the introduction. So I think that what we're going to be seeing in the rest of Mark is we're going to be seeing all four of these things. We're seeing how Jesus is calling people, going, whatever his method is right now, he's going to crowds and whatever. We're going to see in the rest of the book here that he does actually go to his way to go into crowds, and he's bringing along his lead team here. So there seems to be two things going on here. I wrote in my notes here, two big things. First of all, Jesus begins to form his lead team of gospel communication so that the world can hear. That's point one, the first part of the thesis, the gospel. Okay, so Jesus building his lead team. He's not going to be the sole communicator. He's the primary communicator right now, but he's going to be passing this along and empowering more communicators. Second, we see a demonstration of followership in the disciples as they hear, as they receive, as they follow. They haven't fully stepped into agency, but they know they're being called into agency because they're being called into being fishers of people, right? We're going to, in their minds, I suppose, come alongside Jesus and help him with whatever his mission is. They might be thinking right now, we're going to be gathering a following, maybe. In the introduction of Mark, still in the introduction, still in chapter 1, we're looking at how Jesus is setting himself up to do his public ministry, not alone, but by building a team around him. And that team around him aren't being called into an administrative role, or, well, yes, administrative, yes, supportive, yes, friendship, doing life together. But on top of, building on all of that, it's also co-laborers, I suppose you could say, joining in ministry with Jesus. They're being called into the same kind of agency that Jesus is being called into. All right, so what do I need to do? Here's what I said about what I need to do. Okay, so initially I had to be honest that I'm not really sure. So I'm going to work this. I said, so let's work through this. So this is just me in the text working this out. So first, like the disciples, I have heard and I have received, and I'm now following Jesus. Okay, now I know that I'm assuming here, because we don't see it in the story, that the disciples have heard, but we clearly know they know something about Jesus because they've jumped into followership pretty right away. So I'm assuming that they know what Jesus is about before they completely abandon everything to follow him. That's an assumption I'm making, I know. I'm assuming the disciples have heard, that they're now following. And yeah, I don't think I have to make that assumption, though, because I think that what I've noticed, just as pastoring, sometimes I call people who don't know the message of the gospel. Sometimes I call people who aren't familiar with Jesus much, and yet I invite them to come alongside me and just sort of be a part of things. You know, in particular, musicians who would never come to any kind of church setting unless, particularly guys, unless they're able to give back, because guys tend to like to reciprocate. If they're going to be helped, they would prefer to reciprocate. They would prefer to give the help and give the strength than being on the receiving end. And so with some of my musician friends, I let them jump into what might be ministry positions first, and they'll be on the band playing a guitar or playing the drums, and I'm okay with that. So maybe this is the case here too. You know, maybe Jesus just looked at the disciples and he knows that the only way he's going to get these disciples into the kingdom is to invite them into some form of leadership, right? Into some form of this is how you give back. Maybe that's what's going on here. So I don't have to assume that they've heard and they've received and they're ready to follow. Maybe it's just that Jesus knows the only way to reach these guys is to give them something to do on the front end. You can go either way. I kind of like the second approach, probably. That, I mean, these are real hardcore fisher guys, right? I mean, they're masculine men, big boy men, you know. So it's very possible that Jesus is just like, the only way I'm going to reach these guys is by giving them something to do. So maybe that's what's going on here. Okay, second, I have been trained to be a follower, and I am again being trained to be a communicator, to communicate the gospel to the lost. So at some level, I'm probably a part of Jesus' lead team of communicators. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to put myself in the story. And I mean, I can't directly put myself in the story. I'm not one of the initial 12 followers of Jesus, and yet the call still remains, particularly post-resurrection. The call remains still to follow Jesus and still to step into agency. And so it's like I see myself in here just a little bit. Okay, so I can see that I believe, I've received, I've heard, I believe, I've received, I'm following, and I think that also this passage is extending the invitation to me that I can also be an agent. And so it's possible, just based on this text, that I'm one of those who communicate the gospel. And same with you. It's possible. And I know it's still early. It's still Mark chapter 1, so it's I don't want to just jump in there and make too many assumptions here. But I think that you and I can step into the text, and you and I can say, okay, so you can say, yes, I've heard the message, I've received Jesus, I'm following Jesus. And this call is also to me, to you, to also step into being a fisher of people, step into agency. The call is to followership, which includes gospel communication leadership. Now, I don't think everybody's called into some kind of administrative leadership, organizational leadership, but there's some sort of kingdom leadership that we're all called into. There's some sort of agency, kingdom agency, that we're all called into. And so followership, we hear the gospel, we receive Jesus, we follow Jesus. Agency is absolutely a part of this, where we're stepping into something and we're going to learn, we're going to grow, and when we're ready, as we've been equipped and empowered to do so and mentored along the way, we're also going to step into the role of a mentor. And we're going to be communicating the gospel, giving opportunity, a moment to, giving people an opportunity to receive Jesus, and helping them figure out what it means to be a follower, and then releasing them also into agency, or having them come alongside us in agency. It's included here. So the question I have, okay, And perhaps you can follow my logic here, because we're just in Mark chapter 1. The question I have is this: who exactly is the call to gospel communication leadership extended to? Maybe that's one of the questions that you could work out in the text as well. Who do you think, when Jesus says, be fishers of people, who do you think that call is extended to? Is it just strictly the 12? Or do you think it's, like I do, like it's broader to everybody right here, right now? After the initial disciples, how do we know who is called to be a gospel communication leader today? Is there a way to know, or does one volunteer for it? When I was doing my undergrad, long time ago, I don't even talk about how long ago that was. When I was doing my undergrad, one of the questions that we kind of passed around the classroom is about calling. Are you called into ministry? Do you just sign up for it? Is it just a job? And I think that we could ask that question of this text too. So we see the disciples are sort of being called to a place of agency, and yet they're also at the same time volunteering for it. And I think we see a little bit later in the Bible that it's not always specifically someone being called. It's also people just stepping up and volunteering for it. They're just the right fit for leadership, for the kingdom leadership for the moment. So what do you think? Is there a way to know that you're called, or can you simply just volunteer for kingdom agency? And I'll let you kind of wrestle with that question, because that's kind of what, just based on this passage right here. Here's a summary that I came up with. Jesus calls everyone into followership. And remember that I'm followership, I'm including all 4 parts of the thesis, that followership includes hearing the gospel, receiving Jesus, following Jesus, and stepping into agency. And on the other side of that, as agents, you and I who already believe and are following Jesus and are stepping out as demonstrators and communicators that the kingdom of God is right here, right now. It includes gospel communication. It includes extending opportunities to say yes to Jesus. It includes mentoring people, and some people would call that discipleship. Many people would call that discipleship. Maybe a better way to think about that today, in today's context, is mentorship. And then it includes having other people walk alongside us in our demonstration of kingdom agency, and helping them be released into their own version of what kingdom agency will look like for them. So there's an additional call in the gospel to this communication leadership, that there is actually the agent, the kingdom agent, looks around and says, I think that these people will be great to walk alongside me. We walk alongside each other, and then while I'm demonstrating kingdom agency, in my brand of it anyways, I'm going to ask these other people around me to also be demonstrating kingdom agency through what it is they feel called to, or they feel best suited for. While someone is embracing followership, they can also be trained for gospel communication leadership. I think that one of the principles that I like to stick with me, one of the guiding principles I have, is I want people to get engaged right away. Like I don't like when people have to sit in the background and just be observers for a while. I hate that. I like it when people can get engaged right away. So while someone is embracing this whole what does it mean to follow Jesus thing, they can also come alongside a kingdom agent, someone who's demonstrating agency, that God's kingdom is here, God's kingdom is now. They can walk alongside that person and grow as an agent at the same time as they're growing as a believer, which Jesus seems to be doing with the disciples. Here's what I wrote down in praying here, and maybe you would pray something similar, and if not, that's okay. God, please help me do better at followership, and please call me into gospel leadership. I put that there because in this passage in Mark chapter 1, it's not clear who the call toward kingdom agency has been given to. Is it just to the disciples, or can everyone be called? And that's going to become clear later in the book, so right now we're just discussing it. God, please train me to lead people toward the gospel and into your present kingdom. Please don't leave me behind. Please use me. You know, I would hate to think that God is doing a new work right here, right now, particularly during the pandemic, and I couldn't be a part of that. I want to be a part of what God's doing, particularly if he's leading people closer to himself. if there are people who want to connect with God and I don't make myself available to help them, that would make me feel sad. So God, please don't leave me behind. Whatever you're doing, my prayers, whatever you're doing right now, God, during this pandemic season, can I please be a part of that? And can I please be a demonstrator of your kingdom? Can I be a kingdom agent, a demonstrator and communicator? Both those things have to be. Can I do that right here and right now? Please use me. Please use me to reach the lost. And by lost, that's a system. The system language. It's a Christian word. Lost, people who don't yet know Jesus. Please help me to reach the lost. Please use me to lead people to you and to teach your word, the Bible. Thank you. Okay, so here's my share point. This is based on my inductive study. This is the message that kind of popped out to me, that if somebody were to ask me what my devotions were on, you know, I might say something simple like just the one-liner that I've got in here. And for Sunday's purposes, this is where the message comes from. The twofold call of followership and leadership. You know, I think that agency, leadership, is included within the call to followership. Just to be clear, though, so that we know, the twofold call of followership and leadership, so I can break that down a little bit. Jesus calls everyone into followership, and that's pretty clear. In the gospel, even in the early sections of the gospel, Mark, everybody is called into God's kingdom. I mean, there's the reason why we see demonstrators and communicators of God's kingdom is because the invitation is for everyone. In the text, we see the same formula being used and demonstrated, in that people need to hear, and they do hear the gospel. They're given a moment to receive Jesus, say yes to him, and then they're called into following Jesus as Jesus mentors them, or the disciples mentor them into what it means to be a follower, and then people step into agency. So those four things we see all through here. The disciples hear, they receive quickly, and they follow by completely walking away from their old life to live the new life of a follower. So we see a demonstration of repentance here. I mean, I'm not saying they have to repent of being a fisherman. It's a great life. But what happens is there's this clear moment where these people, initial followers of Jesus, said, yes, I'm going to be a follower. My life is going to look very different. And that's different for everybody. There's some things that God calls us away from, even if it's not bad. There's some things that God calls us away from just because there's new opportunities after we say yes to Jesus. And there's exciting opportunities that weren't available to us before we said yes to Jesus. And so for these guys, they step into a new opportunity for them. So I guess it's less about repentance and more about stepping into new opportunities of what being a follower looks like. Second of all, so Jesus calls everyone into followership. That's first. Second of all, Jesus also calls people into leadership. And I think it's so important that we see this in Mark chapter 1, in the very opening introduction passages of the gospel, because it shows us what's ahead in the rest of the gospel and what we can expect in the gospel, and what we can expect as followers of Jesus, what we're being called into. This is for everybody. What the disciples probably didn't know at the time is Jesus calling them into leadership. So many people who say yes to Jesus, they don't know what opportunities for leadership exist for them now. They don't know about the new opportunities of kingdom agency that are now at their fingertips, as the disciples didn't know what they were truly getting into, I think. Fishers of men, fishers of people, like what could that possibly mean? It was highly contextual, but there was probably a question mark. So at the very initial stages when we say yes to Jesus, there's so many opportunities for a variety, a wide diversity of expressions of kingdom agency. Specifically, Jesus is calling them, these first disciples, into gospel communication leadership. A gospel communication leadership can look practically like anything. As we've seen, as the pandemic has hit us, church life looks very different now. Everything has gone online now because churches can't meet physically anymore. So communication looks very different. Looks different now than it did before the pandemic. And even our expressions of churches look very different across the internet gatherings that we have. You know, some churches are just doing a live stream from the pulpit, like on a Sunday morning, live streaming at whatever their service time is. Other people are pre-recording. It's still a live stream, but it's like a watch party. You know, they're watching everything that was pre-recorded, and yet they're highly engaged in the forums that they use. The way that 4Community is doing it, we pre-record the study and pre-record the message, and so we consume content ahead of time, and then when we gather, for us, Wednesdays and Sunday mornings in particular, for this message content, that's where we get a chance to connect, debrief, pray for what matters to you, and we discuss the content that we've already consumed, almost like an upside-down classroom model. So we're already seeing diversity in how people are doing church these days. So we're all called into gospel communication, but it can look very different. Their training and releasing happens alongside their opportunity into fellowship. I think this is huge. I think this is something that maybe churches need to, we who might consider ourselves, you know, stuck-in Christians, stalwart Christians, you know, pillars of the church, whatever we want to consider ourselves as. You know, Jesus' model is that when he called people, when people showed an interest to Jesus, even before they knew what they were getting into, maybe, Jesus just threw them in there. You know, yeah, Jesus, if I could contextualize it today, I'm walking down the street, I see a neighbor, I think, oh, he might be a good leader. I pull him into a board meeting and say, here's your new board member. You know, this is kind of what's going on here, except with these guys, you know, he sees these guys fishing in a boat, whatever fisher guys are doing at the time, he pulls them into his lead team. So now you're a CEO, you're a CFO, you're a COO, whatever, you know, just you're part of the initial organization. I'm just giving you all of this authority and power right now. And that's how Jesus began the church. And it's not how we see a lot of churches functioning anymore, but maybe, you know, it's time we see more of this, that we recognize that maybe, just to contextualize, and if reading between the lines a little bit, you know, these fisher guys, you know, maximum manhood, you know, masculinity all over, masculinity oozing out of them because these are fisher guys, you know. They want to reciprocate. They want to jump in. They want to do stuff. They don't want to sit and listen. They want to get in and do stuff. And maybe as we move forward, we could be more open to let people walk alongside us and give them power and authority, like right off the bat, and let them kind of flounder like we are as we're trying to figure out our way forward. Followership and leadership happen together, at least in this. This is how Jesus did it. So if we're trying to be missional, if we're trying to be missional minded, if we're trying to think as agents, as we want the gospel to stick, as we want to go into new territory and expand God's kingdom, well, this is the model that Jesus used, okay? I didn't make this up. Jesus made this up. Followership and leadership happen together. Does it happen for everybody together? No, clearly, because we're going to see in the later parts of Mark that people become followers of Jesus and they never step into leadership. We're going to see, but that's for another passage, another video, right? But for now, we're seeing that followership and leadership happen almost spontaneously, particularly at the very beginning stages of what Jesus does. He looks around for people who would make great leaders, even people who don't yet fully know who he is and are just trying to gain a sense of who he is. He doesn't call them into sitting and listening to lectures. He calls them to join the adventure, and not just join the adventure as a giver and a volunteer, as a cheerleader. Join the adventure as a co-leader. That's how Jesus started Christianity. Okay, this is the very beginning of Christianity. What did Jesus do to start the whole church thing? Well, he called people into walk alongside him into leadership, not to the very first thing he did, not to gather a group of participants or listeners, but to gather a group of people who wanted to. Oh, I said participants, but he is calling people into participation, immediately calling into participation. Participate alongside me and learn alongside me while we do this together. Here's the takeaway that I'm going to, from the share, here's a takeaway. Gospel followership is also gospel leadership. Gospel followership is also gospel leadership. I don't think that I would particularly lead with this phrase if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't know Jesus very, very well. I don't think I'd open with that phrase. However, I would be mindful, and this would be a guiding principle for me, and it is a guiding principle for me as I interact with people, that I'm also looking around for people that may want to jump in and just help right away. And there's no way that they would give Jesus even a second thought without knowing that there's a way for them to contribute, there's a way for them to do stuff. Just bring them into leadership right off the bat. Bring them into activity and partnership right off the bat. And just let them fly alongside you and flounder together, So gospel fellowship is also gospel leadership. Okay, this is the back end of the message that we're going to be receiving on Sunday. If you want to join us, remember 4Community creates community spaces where you can connect with others and connect with God. If you'd like to join us on Sunday morning at 10:30, give me a shout out, send me a PM, whatever you want to do, leave a post, however it is, it's best for you, and I will send you the link, a personal invite. We don't display it publicly because we don't want to be Zoom bombed, but connect with me and you get to be invited to this thing too. Okay, see you next time.
Was I forsaken? Lord is in this place.